Okay.
Game on.
Call the meeting to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Kurt?
Here.
Mark?
Here.
Nancy?
Yes.
Eric?
Excused?
Cindy?
Excused?
Bob?
Here.
Jay?
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum present. We have 4 assembly members in the room and 1 on the phone. It's now time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with liberty
and justice for all.
Okay, now it's time for the administration of oath for our 2 new police officers. So Kelly or Mindy, are you guys going to do that? Welcome to Petersburg.
David, will you come forward, please?
You can go up there, John. Go for it.
David Plagans, do you solemnly affirm that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Alaska and the ordinances of the Petersburg Borough, and that you will honestly, faithfully, and impartially perform the duties of police officer for the Petersburg Borough, Alaska, to the best of your ability?
I do.
After your
Congratulations. Welcome to Petersburg.
Okay, I'll raise your right hand. Louis Wachter, do you solemnly affirm that you will support and defend the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Alaska, and the ordinances of the Petersburg Borough, and that you will honestly, faithfully, and impartially perform the duties of police officer for the Petersburg Borough, Alaska, to the best of your ability?
Congratulations. Okay, for those in the listening audience, we have just sworn in our 2 new police officers, Plagans and Waiter, I believe. I probably mispronounced them, but that's my attempt. So welcome to Petersburg. Okay, and just for the record, we have 1 more assembly member on the phone. Cindy Logadakis is with us, so we will move forward. At this point, before we get into the non-compliance hearing, I'd like to move forward amendment or approval of today's meeting agenda. We need to add to the agenda the possibility of an executive session, and we do not have to give a 3-day notice to that, so I would entertain a motion to amend the agenda and add that to it.
So moved. Second.
Okay, a motion's been made by Member Greger, seconded by Member Lynn to amend the agenda to add the possibility of an executive session. And if we do that, it would be after the testimony for the non-compliance hearing. So is there any other changes while we're amending the agenda today that anybody would like to make? Okay, see none. All those in favor of modifying the agenda like we talked about, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll add that. Okay, now it's time for a non-compliance hearing for an order to vacate and repair or demolish a dangerous building located at 510 Lumber Street, Island Trailer Court, space 4W. So at this point, I believe the Borough building official will give his testimony. Is that you, Joe?
Oh my gosh, I forgot all about the swearing to people in. Yes, we have to swear
Oh, that's
everyone
right.
in.
Everyone, as they come forward? Or everybody, can we do it
Everyone
all
that
at
will be
once?
testifying today, it would be nice if I could, if I could swear them all in right now.
So anybody in the audience that's interested in participating in this non-compliance hearing, please come forward and be sworn in so you can testify.
Thank you, Liz. That may be possibly testifying. Yes.
I don't know. I was nodding at Joe. I don't think you were involved, but you're more than welcome to if you want.
No, go ahead. All the cool people are ready. Okay, anyone else that thinks they may be testifying at all during the non-compliance hearing? All right, thank you, everybody. Raise your right hand, please. Do you all swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I'll have you all sign forms later. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, we had 6 people get sworn in to testify. So Joe Bertinoli would be the first one. He's the building official for
Yes.
Petersburg.
Thank you, Assembly. Well, it's you got the packet in front of you, and we were here once before when we decided to do this, but we'll start off with the basics here and just give you a little bit of where we're at. First off, I'm Joe Bertignoli. I'm the building official. I've been in the building trades for over 40 years. I started as a carpenter and a house builder, and then I came to the city in '91. And then I started out as a maintenance worker for the city then. Well, I came to the Borough, or Petersburg, long before that, but in '91 I started working for the Borough's maintenance and doing building inspections also under the building official at that time. I started off right away, and then I gradually worked into getting my building inspector credentials, plans examiner credentials, plumbing inspector credentials, so I could do all aspects of it. A little over 2 years ago, I came the full-time building official when the other one retired. So I did, until then, I did both maintenance and inspections on city buildings. I became the building official and the / code enforcement officer, which is a new position. It's my job to go into these building projects around town and see if they comply with building codes, building safety, and ordinances of the city of Petersburg. It's a dual purpose there. Building codes are meant to protect people who are living in the house and also to protect future owners for the value of the house along the ways. So I feel that through all the years I've been walking into all of these buildings, commercial, residential, and such, it makes me more than qualified to see a dangerous situation when I walk into a building. I can, in fact, I find that going into friends' houses, it's hard not to pick out code violations in their house. They'll stare right out, but you don't say. So I notice, I would say, out of compliance, unsafe situations in houses. So, but the reason we're here is, is that we did face this thing in a trailer on 4W. And I'm just going to point out some of the things in the packet that you already have in front of you. I'm not going to go through the packet page by page because you had to read it. It's quite lengthy. It's 80-some pages. But I would like to go over the timeline and some of the things that I noticed in this trailer when we had to go in there. Not only is it unsafe to live in, it's unsafe for anybody in the surrounding area. Immediate neighbors, up in that area, trailers are pretty close together. And when you have a situation where one trailer or one structure, no matter whether it be a trailer house or whatever, is dangerous, it poses a danger to your neighbors. And that's part of why codes are there too. It's there to protect your neighbors. Seeing the dilapidated state of this trailer, in my opinion, and in others too, it would be far too excessive an expense to repair it up to standards that we would deem safe for themselves. I'm not going to talk about all the electrical. Gary Morgan, the electrician from Power and Light, is going to speak a little more in depth about the electrical issues that pose a danger to the residents and the immediate neighbors. He'll talk about a little bit about the pedestal. He'll talk about the creative power hookups that they did on the pedestal there, which were not only dangerous, and also about the interior, and you show the interior violations in there, noting that not only we're talking about a trailer that people are living in, and it's not just adults. There's children living in this too, So, and how they are inquisitive about all these open wires and open receptacles, sticking their fingers in there. Yeah, not a good situation. So I'd like to look at, talk about the timeline a little bit as we proposed it here. We went back when this first problem was first noted. It was noted that there was power thieving going on up there when the meter reader was up there, and they noticed that there was power coming and lights and fans and music coming from these trailers that had been disconnected months previous. So it was kind of figured out how they were doing it, and this was not the first time. I'd like to note that I believe it was 3 times that this same trailer has been noticed for robbing power. They and Gary will talk a little bit about the methods that the first time they did it, they just booed it and then they played it and then but they found ways to circumnavigate all of those things. When we did notice this power thing, we went and got a summary abatement, it's called, which allowed us to go into the trailer and see what dangers were posed. And it's a summary abatement. It's kind of an emergency order that we were able to go up there with the police officers, and we swept through the trailer, and the people moved out that were there, and that's where we photoed and noticed all of these violations happening. In the dangerous situation with what's going on. So at that time, after the summary abatement, we went and boarded the place up, and so we couldn't allow anybody to live in there at the time until things were corrected. But we did find out shortly thereafter that they had removed the boards from the notices, or from the walls, and we're living in there again. So at that time, we went to the order of we went to the court and got a search warrant to go in there and reissue and board it up again. And I believe that was on. Well, shortly after, I've contacted Mr. Dawson several times, trying to get him to either get the people out of there, or we were going to, board it back up again, or give us permission to board it back up without the court order. Well, he's not an easy person to get a hold of, so we ended up going through with the court order. And again, so we went back up there with this administrative search warrant on, I believe, October 26th, and with the police again, and they evacuated a tenant again, and so we reboarded it up again, this time a little bit more securely. We boarded up more windows, more doors, and plus, along with both of these times when we're going up there and boarding it up, we're posting first the dangerous building signs. Secondly, we posted the search warrant. We posted the dangerous building sign the second time. So the properties were posted on all doors and on the shed that we boarded up too. So back in December, when it appears that nothing was going to happen, that's when we came to you and asked for, to schedule this hearing so we could determine once and for all the outcome of this dangerous building as it's determined. Where was it? Yeah, as you look at on page 3 of your packet, it pretty much spells out what a dangerous building is and by our ordinance and what they are, and we'll cover on this again later. Dilapidated, unsanitary, fail to carry any of the amenities, and without water, sewer hookups. They had a catchment system for water. Electricity was, I said, cobbled together. Sometimes, at best, it was dangerous for anybody touching it. Unsafe, unsanitary. The electrical portion of the buildings was very sketchy, to say the least, and so it did not meet up to any standards as far as codes or safety. As far and then just to cover that too, in your packet there was quite a few pictures, and I know if you could make sense of a lot of these pictures, like on page 9, the catchment system. That's what they used. They cut water off of that rusty roof that I question whether that was healthy water or not, into a tote, and then it kind of went through a hose, and then I don't know how they pumped it into the house. But on page 11 shows the electrical hookup into the pedestal when Gary Morgan and the rest of the power and light crew opened it up, and page 10 shows the wires going underground. They were kind of buried under a piece of tin there. They had spliced wires with tape and such, but it was, what the soils are like down here and underneath the ground, and it was just, if it rained, it was in a puddle of water, and I don't know why this stuff didn't short out. Well, I do know why it didn't short out, because they weren't on any breakers. I mean, a lot of the stuff was bypassing breakers, and then shows the wires coming up and how he hot wired under the pedestal, and I said Gary will talk a little bit more about that. Going back into some of the other pictures, and you see some of the code violations as we go along in the electrical section inside. You have overloaded open boxes, spliced wires, open breaker boxes, and a lot of those breakers, I don't even know if they were acting as breakers or if they just bypassed those either. I mean, Gary could see that. You see the wires going into switches and rheostats with wire nuts exposed. All of this is against code. You see on page 15, you see a multiple receptacle outlet plugged into a multiple receptacle outlet plugged into a multiple. It's like, I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 receptacles plugged into that one box, which is open and wire nuts exposed. But they got Christmas lights up. Some of the other ones, as you go on, 16 is another open box, 17's more open. And then it shows on 18, shows the catchment system again. That is, it kind of goes into I'm not quite sure where the hose comes out of the, one tote goes into the other tote, which goes into the hose, which goes into the house, which, not code, that's all I'm saying. 19 is one of the more dangerous situations that we had here, and that's that hot water heater. That is, that just shows a weed burner just kind of resting on something there. I'm not sure what it's propped up on, going into the bottom of this pressure vessel, which is a water tank, is a pressure vessel, and it shows it, just plugged right in there. 20 shows the water heater exhaust pipe, which is going out of the house, which you can see the T111, it's all charred around there, and that's indication that we're just this close to burning. Once it gets charred like that, ignition is not too far away. The one thing that makes the hot water heater, why it's so against code, other not just the weed burner, is it has no T&P valve on it. And for those who don't know what it's a temperature and pressure valve, which if your water tank gets over a certain pressure, it flips up and lets hot water out so it doesn't explode. And if you've ever seen that YouTube video of a hot water tank, they put it into a shed and they tested to see what happens when it goes over pressure. it's a rocket. It is basically what it is. It blew up the shed, shot through the up a couple hundred feet, and then came down Lord knows where. So that in itself is just an accident looking for a place to happen. So, and it's a heavy fire hazard too. Obviously, not only a danger too, and then with that explosion, if that thing were to go, it would take out the neighbor's house too. So that's just kind of some of the pictures. So, you can look at the rest if you have any questions. It just shows whatnot. But and as far as a dangerous building is what we're classifying this thing as. We're classifying it, and there's lots of reason. And the definitions are all there in the ordinance, and it says those which had become so dilapidated, decayed, unsafe, unsanitary, or so utterly fail to provide the amenities essential to decent living, they are unfit for human habitation, or are likely to cause sickness or disease. And that pretty much sums it up, because without water services, without sewer services, no heat methods other than occasional water catchment that they did have coming off a rusty roof, going through what pipes we don't know, it's pretty much unfit. Can it be repaired? Sure, anything can be repaired. Can it be repaired at a reasonable fee or reasonable cost? I don't think so. I believe that, at the rates that electrician charges, if you could get an electrician to go in there and touch this, you would be talking more than the trailer's worth every day he's in there. I mean, you're talking what is $80, $500 a day for an electrician. That's probably cheap. So, you put 2-3 days in there, you got $1,500 into a trailer, which, if you go back in the cost, the trailer's assessed at $3,000, and the only reason it got to $3,000 is because we looked at the assessment and it said 10, and we could not believe it. So we asked the assessor, says, if you've seen this, we showed him pictures, how can this trailer be with 10,000? So he lowered it to 3, and I think it still could go lower than that. But you see in your packet also that it shows a bill of sale when Ryan Dawson bought this trailer in 2014. It was he paid $500 for it, and maybe back in 2014 when it had power and everything else and was hooked up legally, it may have been worth $500 for somebody to stay in. I mean, it was, but throughout the years with the way they rigged the power up, I mean, and they had, and I think Gary's going to touch on this a little bit too. They had not just cobbling together the electricity, which made it. They had a DC power system going in there too, which they integrated it. So in case there was no power coming from the pedestal that they were robbing, they ran off of batteries. I think that's why we have a lot of batteries missing around on boats. Some of the violations that you've seen the sanitation violations as far as water and sewer. You've seen the electrical violations. The plumbing violations add up. Is the building 50% damaged or decayed or deteriorated from its original value or structure? Yes, more than 50% from its original value. And that's that's in the ordinance also, that if it is more than 50% decayed, damaged, or whatever, deteriorated, it deemed it shall be demolished in the cases of, or if it can't be repaired. Demolition costs far exceed what that trailer's worth. In the borough. Estimated it, Public Works estimated it would be approximately $10,000 to get rid of that thing. And that's an estimate of what it cost us to demo those other two repossessed trailers that the borough repossessed. And mainly that is man hours, equipment time, some dump fees, but that has to happen. The proximity to other trailers, the proximity to power lines dictated the extra cost, because it's extra time, because they can't just go in there. If they could just go in there with the excavator and a dump truck, pick it up and move it, it would be done in no time. But they had to take the small backhoe, kind of finesse in there so they wouldn't wreck another trailer, so they wouldn't, because they had a power line right in front of those other trailers. And I believe the situation is the same with this one. So, that being said, Gary's going to touch on the elections. So I guess in the end result, what I'd like to see and what I think should happen is my recommendation is that the assembly order a 30-day repair for the trailer at 4W. No person shall occupy that structure in this interim time. And should no action be taken to remediate the problem within that time frame, the borough will go in and remove the structure without any further notice. And all along through this whole process, we have been concurring with the attorney. So it's not through the notices, through the legalities. So we've been covering our bases and, dotting our I's and crossing our T's to make sure that we were doing things right, because again, we're kind of like with that repossession, we're kind of treading on new ground here. We've never done that before, but she did advise us that once we go through the 30-day process, if nothing takes place, again, I think for anything to take place, it would be far too expensive to endure for most people. That we have the authority or the will, if you want, to go in there and remove it. That's all I got.
Is there any questions by any of the assembly members of Joe? And other people that are going to testify have the right to ask questions as well of any of the people giving testimony. So, no questions? All right, Joe, thank you. Was there other city, borough officials, employees that were going to give testimony to this issue?
Hello, I'm Gary Morgan. I'm the electrician for Petersburg Municipal Power and Light. I kind of wrote a summary of what I saw at this location back when we walked through it. This is September 9th, 2016. And we took approximately 50 photos just to compile this code violation list. By no means is it comprehensive. It's one of those things I could have kept going. I just kind of put a reasonable amount of time into it. And it's my opinion that this residence is an absolute fire and electrical hazard. Anyone that would try and live in that residence is putting themselves at risk. Just to kind of go through the electrical system, Joe did a pretty good job of explaining a lot of the more important areas. But some of the things I saw, almost every outlet and lighting outlet had been removed with the wires sticking out of the boxes. I think you can see that on most of the pictures. Some of the circuits were abandoned and then refed using extension cords, which is why all the boxes were open and exposed. I assumed that they had problems with the electrical system, and that's why they had to repower, refeed with electrical cords to try and make certain areas work. It's obvious that in some places that there was kind of a trial and error. We did see some scorch marks. When we went to investigate the power theft, they'd gotten creative several times. And the last time, the most dangerous way they did it was completely bypassing the main breakers. So basically what they did is they opened up the side that the power and light has feeding the trailer before the meter. There's no fuse, no circuit breaker protecting this. And they tapped into it using a screw and an extension cord. So literally they had nothing that would trip that circuit. They could have heated up that wire with more and more stuff until they had a fire, and that was what was feeding this trailer. So, and then you see 4 or 5 different ganged multi-outlet devices plugged into these extension cords that have no protection. So what causes fires is too much amperage on a cord that can't support it. So it heats up, and it's just a shock to me that this didn't burn down. So I found some other. I could go on and on, but I think electrical panel underneath the kitchen sink with no cover. That was the main feed into it. I think there's a picture somewhere there in the packet. Absolutely no. All kinds of things. No GFIs in the bathrooms. No GFIs in the kitchens. Anywhere where there's water involved, you should have GFI protection. None of that. Yeah, I mean, you can see by the pictures it was just very inventive how they were able to power this. And then on top of that, they also had a DC system where they'd taken car batteries and an inverter and powered up circuits. Hopefully that wasn't the same time that AC power was being supplied to the trailer, because all kinds of things can go wrong there. Plus the wiring is not sized for DC amperage. Overall, it's just not to code. The other thing I think we wanted to talk about was what would it take to bring this back to code. I think Joe kind of mentioned a little bit about this, but one thing about mobile homes, I've been an electrician since 1994. I've worked in several states and internationally as well. Mobile homes aren't made to be remodeled. They're meant to be built one time at a very quick, cost-saving manner. The walls usually are 2 inches thick instead of a standard 2x4 or 2x6. They're 2 inches thick and usually foam-filled. So you can't, if there's a wire that's gone bad in there, you can't just tear open the wall and rewire it. A lot of times it's you end up tearing apart the whole wall structure trying to repair a single wire. The past companies that I've worked for, when there was any kind of a remodel on a mobile home, we would just refuse to work on it. The liability there was just too great. And like my boss said, this building is more of a liability than an asset. It's just, I wouldn't spend the time on it, even if it was my free labor. This wouldn't be worth it. So I talked about the 3 times that they stole power. They had 3 different instances. One time they broke the seals, removed the boots on the back of the meter, and reinstalled it. The second time they stole power from the adjoining service. And then the third time they bypassed the meter completely. And you could see scorch marks where they tried to connect the wire. They must have done it a few times. They were very brave. And some of the other things I saw too, that the original feed to the building wasn't to code. It had a splice underneath the building with no protection, no waterproofing. It was just happened to be up off the ground, and I think that's what kept it from having an issue for so long. That's all I can think of. Anyone have any questions about the pictures or?
Any questions of Mr. Morgan about the conditions of the electrical in this trailer? Okay, I don't see any, Gary. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is there any other borough employees that are going to present testimony today? Okay, seeing none. The next people that can testify under this hearing are the owners of the subject property? Are the owners in the room to testify? Okay, seeing none. Is there any witnesses to be presented by the owners or here representing the owner? There's none. Is there any other interested parties in the audience? Occupant, mortgagee, leasee, or any other person having an interest in this building? Seeing none, we'll move forward. With that being said, we're at the point in the process where I think it's up to the assembly to deliberate this. And do we want to deliberate this in a open session or recess into a executive session?
Go ahead, Bob. I'm comfortable doing it in open session if
All right, so
I have no preference.
then can you hear us on the line, Cindy and Kurt? Are you following along with this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Mark, and I agree with Bob. Let's leave it in the open here. This is a no-brainer.
Okay.
Concur.
All right, so according to the information given to us by the attorney, the assembly is to make and adopt written findings of fact from the testimony and evidence offered at the hearing as to whether or not the building in question is a dangerous building within the terms of Petersburg Municipal Code 9.20.010 and also 9.20.080. As part of its decision, the assembly can either, 1, adopt written findings of fact at the meeting for the mayor's signature, 2, direct the building official to prepare a draft written finding of fact and order for its consideration at the next meeting, or 3, it can delegate to the mayor the preparation, approval, and signing of written findings of fact, order consistent with the deliberations and decisions. So I guess we would, as suggested by Mr. Bertinoli, was to issue a order, 30-day repair order, or the building can be removed or demolished by the borough. So we need to have a motion, I would think, along those lines is what how we're gonna proceed.
So move.
So we're gonna proceed with the order, 30-day order to repair, or Debbie?
Actually, and I might ask for Liz's help here, but you guys should go to, please, in your supplemental packet to page 80 through 82. These are draft findings of fact that either, if you're all going to approve them now, you should, go ahead and go through them and modify them if needed. You need to decide one of the 3 in H, how it's going to happen. Whether you're going to do it now, whether you're going to direct the building official to prepare them for your next meeting, or delegate to the mayor to approve the findings of fact. But you do need to go over it. You need to talk about the findings of fact.
Okay, so
Yes?
that's why it might have been better to go into executive session, but this will be fine. We could just sit here and talk about it. So let's do you guys have a copy of this, Kurt and Cindy? Did you get that email?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so Liz, do you have any input on this?
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to point out that these draft findings that Debbie referred to support Joe's recommendation that you do the 30-day order, and then if the repairs are not made in 30 days, then the borough would proceed to demolish the structures. And it's the trailer and then also a small shed that's behind the trailer. I think when you go through this, basically, it just reiterates every point that's made in your packet and that Joe brought up in testimony, but we really just need to make sure that we have all the facts laid out in writing, that you acknowledge that these facts were brought forward as part of the record, and then you're adopting and making this, adopting an order as a result of consideration of these facts.
Okay, so I have a question. If we proceed this way and we give the 30-day notice to repair or remove it on their own, if that doesn't take place, then the borough is liable for the cost to remove it, or do we send a collection notice to the owner of the property and see if that gets us anywhere?
We can try, but what the plan would be at the end of the 30 days, if the structures were not repaired or removed, the borough would do that. We would absorb those costs and attempt to recollect. Be honest, I expect the likelihood of collection probably pretty low, but we would do what we could.
Do you have the authority in ordinance to pursue collection?
But along the same token, you can't squeeze water from a rock either, for that matter.
Nancy, you got a comment?
Does any of this responsibility fall on the McMurrans who own the park?
Steve, can you answer that?
Not directly, but I believe Liz and others have been meeting with the McMurrans prior to this even to talk about some of the condition of some of the structures that are up there. And with the hope that we can get them to be a little more proactive in the future on managing this. Am I correct, Liz, that they don't have much say other than telling people they need to move their trailer?
And we talked to the attorney about this exact question, and the attorney didn't think that we could pursue the park owner liability on this.
Okay, so we couldn't ask for any retribution from the park owner, the people that own the trailer park.
That was the attorney's thinking.
Okay, thanks. So it sounds like we need to make sure all these findings of fact are read into the record, or make some kind of a motion that we enter these 12 items into the record, and then if that's the way we're going to go, issue to vote to order a 30-day repair or remove condition. That's the way we should proceed. So is there a motion?
Go ahead, Debbie. Were you going to say something?
I was going to suggest that you just read out loud these draft findings of fact, and as you go through, if you see anything that should be amended, say so at that time. I'll make notes, and then at the end, make your motion to whatever it is you decide to do.
Okay. So we'll proceed in that manner. Does that sound good with the assembly? I mean, I don't know if it's the right protocol, but if we're going to do this again.
You think motion should be first?
I think we should have this information so we can digest it beforehand if it's at all possible. But maybe we can't until it's presented as testimony at the...
You did have it in an email.
Okay. I didn't read that much in depth then. Okay, so here we go. The assembly finds the subject buildings constitute dangerous buildings as defined in Petersburg Borough Code, Section 9.20010, based on the following facts. 1. On September 9th, 2016, after inspection and investigation, the building official deemed the building located at 4W Island Trailer Court, 510 Lumber Street in Petersburg to be dangerous buildings and a nuisance under the Borough Code, and posted proper notice at the property. The owner of the building was determined to be Ryan Dawson. Is there any changes anybody would like to make to that, or is item 1 acceptable?
Acceptable.
Acceptable.
Okay, on September 12th and September 28th, 2016, notice in compliance with Borough Code, Section 9.20050 was given to the owner of record, an occupant of the mobile home, and the trailer park owner, providing information as to the necessary corrective action. So, any change in that, or are we all good with that? Okay, we'll move on to 3. On November 7th, 2016, the borough building official notified the assembly of the owner's noncompliance with the notice and failure to perform the required corrective action. On December 5th, 2016, the assembly scheduled a public hearing for noncompliance. Okay, we've crossed that bridge. Is everybody okay with that? Mm-hmm. Okay, on December 8th, 2016, notice of said public hearing was provided to the owner of record of the buildings, Brian Dawson, and owner of record of the property, Patrick and Patricia McMurran, as required by Borough Code. Okay, so we've done that. On December 15th, the borough official provided a copy of his noncompliance report dated December 9th, 2016, and all attachments to the owner of record of the buildings, Ryan Dawson, and the owner of record of the property, Patrick and Patricia McMurran. Okay, so that is item 6. Any changes to any of this? Or item 5? On January 3rd, 2017, the Petersburg Borough Assembly conducted a duly noticed public hearing. And at said hearing, Joe Bertinoli, building official, and Gary Morgan, Petersburg Municipal Power and Light electrician, provided oral testimony and written evidence that the buildings are so dilapidated, decayed, unsafe, unsanitary, and so utterly fail to provide the amenities essential to decent living that they are unfit for human habitation or are likely to cause sickness or disease so as to work injury to the health, moral, safety, of general welfare of those living therein due to the comprised electrical systems and dangerous water heating system, such that the buildings are dangerous buildings under Borough Code Section 9.20.010, Section E. Okay, we all good with this so far?
Yes.
At said hearing, Joe Bertinoli, building official, and Gary Morgan, Petersburg Municipal Power and Light, provided oral testimony and written evidence that the buildings are unsafe, unsanitary, or dangerous to the safety or general welfare of the people of Petersburg due to the comprised electrical system, dangerous water heating system, such that the buildings are dangerous buildings under Borough Code Section 9.20.010, Section I. Okay, we all up to speed here? At said hearing, Joe Bertinoli, building official, and Gary Morgan, Petersburg Municipal Power and Light electrician, provided oral testimony and written evidence that the buildings are in violation of numerous provisions of Petersburg Borough Code, namely the National Fire Prevention Association 70-211, portion of the National Electrical Code adopted by the State of Alaska and by the Borough under Petersburg Municipal Code 14.16.010, such that the buildings are dangerous buildings under Borough Code Section 9.20.010, Section J. Item 10, at said hearing, Joe Bertinoli, building official, provided tax assessment information demonstrating that the buildings are more than 50% damaged or decayed or deteriorated from their original value or structures, such that they are subject to demolition under Borough Code Section 9.20.020, Section C. Item 11, at said hearing, Joe Bertinoli, a building official, and Gary Morgan, Petersburg Municipal Power and Light electrician, provided oral and written testimony that the occupants of the building had illegal diverted power on 3 separate occasions. And item 12, at said hearing, Joe Bertinoli, building official, provided a written testimony that the buildings were reoccupied in violation of the borough's order on September 12, 2016. Given the multiple incidents of diversion of power and the numerous code violations at this location, creating conditions that render these dangerous buildings, and the lack of remedial action by the building owner, it is now necessary and appropriate to take immediate action to abate the dangerous buildings. Okay, so those are the 12 items and a little testimony at the end.
Well done.
So, you on board with that, Kurt and Cindy? Okay, so I am too. Okay, so the order would be, is this what we should put in the form of a motion then?
I would think so, yes.
Okay, that's the way I read it, and I can't make a motion, so I would entertain a motion if someone wants to read the order, and we'll get a second to it.
So move.
So I would move.
We should read it into the record, maybe.
Oh.
So I would move to adopt written findings of fact for the mayor's signature. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, should we read the order so it's on the record, or just say it's the order provided to us on page 81 of our supplementary?
Yes, the order provided to us on page 80 and 81 of our supplementary.
Okay.
That works, Debbie?
That'll work.
Cool.
Second.
Okay, so, any discussion on the motion? Clerk, call the roll.
Nancy?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, so it passes 6-0 that we will provide that order to the property owner. Okay, I guess I could have just done the same thing and said items 1 through 12 on page 81. Didn't have to read the whole thing, but
You did right by reading it into the record, though,
I
Mark,
think
so
it should have
thank
been
you.
read into the record.
Yeah.
So, okay, that is over, and we've already done approval of minutes. No, we haven't. We need a motion to approve the minutes of the December 5th and December 19th regular meeting minutes. I'd entertain a motion to do so.
I'll move to approve the minutes for the December 5th and 19th meeting.
Second.
Okay, is there any changes to those? Okay, all those in favor of approving those meeting minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, those two meetings minutes have been approved. We've already gone through amendment and approval of today's meeting agenda. Next item, item 7, is public hearings. There's a public hearing for ordinance 2016-14. This is an ordinance authorizing the sale of Lot A, Block 302, Greenbelt Subdivision, Airport Addition, parcel 01-006-442, plat number 77-2 in the Petersburg Recording District. Is there anybody in the office that would, or in the room that would like to testify under this public hearing? Seeing none, public hearing's closed for that ordinance. Bid awards, there are none. Is there anybody in the audience today with views related to items on today's agenda, which would mean the LID issue or anything else? So, okay. Just come forward, state your name and who you represent, and give your testimony, please. We'll start in the front of the room, and just you guys could kind of police yourselves on who comes first.
Hi, my name is Tracy Welch. I represent the interests of property 1105 Valkyrie Street. I just wanted to say that I'm in opposition of the proposed LID project. I've lived on the street for nearly 30 years. The house has been in my family for more than that. Just a little background on the neighborhood for those who might not be familiar with it. Valkyrie Street has been a Coast Guard neighborhood for many years. Right now it's predominantly owned. Most of the lots are under the ownership of the Coast Guard. So if the proposal did go through, our fate would be pretty much sealed with however they decided to vote. If they were given one vote, is they given to the current owner or the current occupants? It's a very transient neighborhood. They're there for 2 years at a time. There's also a Coast Guard playground in the neighborhood that is used by multiple families that aren't related to Coast Guard. It's used by community members and just kind of an observance. The vast majority of people who do transfer or travel through the area to use that facility are community members. They're not necessarily just limited to Coast Guard families. I guess that my concern is basically that our fate is tied to whichever way the Coast Guard decides to go, which, I mean, I'm an attorney, so I guess I understand that fairness isn't always what comes to pass, but I do have an issue with this. I don't think it's necessarily fair that a lot of different areas in town have received paving, and I've paid my share for those, and now all of a sudden I'm being expected to pay the whole amount of my street. We had 2 lots, and they've now been combined into one, so it's a rather large portion of the street, and I think that that's the case with a lot of other people in the neighborhood as well. So not only are my federal tax dollars going to be used to pay for the Coast Guard situation, but I'm going to have to pay for my own. So I guess I would end with my thoughts that I'm kind of up a creek without a paddle, if you want to put it that way. And yeah, that's just my 2 cents. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else in the audience with views related to items on today's agenda? They don't necessarily have to be about the resolution about the LID. Any item on the agenda.
Hi, Joel Randrup. I live on Lake Street, one of the ones that's on the list to be possibly paved. But I have talked to Carl quite a bit about this, or stopped in and talked to him, and appreciate him being real open and helping everybody with questions. And it seems unfortunate that this, I think, could have been handled a little differently as far as, you know, coming forward with a resolution seems like you're just jamming it down people's throats, really, even though they can still vote no at any time. But there's a lot about LIDs that I don't know. Been an internet expert over the weekend trying to figure this out. And I'm sure there's a lot of other questions that could come along. You know, it's an interesting concept. I know there's a couple ways to form these. This is one of the ways. The other way is a neighborhood has an idea and they come to you and then form it. That might have been a better approach. Maybe a letter might have not been felt like it was so forced on us. And then it gives the neighbors time to have face-to-face. You know, one of the other things, if this is voted through, then, you know, they can vote for or for not having it and not even have to have a meeting with their neighbors, you know, through the mail here, part of this resolution. So, I mean, it is interesting to try and improve neighborhoods this way, and I applaud Carl for keeping his thinking hat on and trying to utilize equipment that's in town. But at this time, this way, I can't be in support of this. Maybe at a later time. And having said that, I think this is also pretty expensive of a project for an LID, and maybe could be put forth as a community improvement project where everybody would share in both the cost of doing it and the benefit, because, for example, our street and lake is a drive-through street, and people driving through there would benefit. We would benefit for no dust. I would love to have it paved, but it would also benefit the community, and property values would increase, and just the overall wellness of the community would benefit. I don't feel that because I pay taxes for certain things and don't use them that I shouldn't have to do that. I do that for the wellness of the community, and these projects, in my mind, would better benefit the community that way and spread it out over all the taxpayers. But that's some more controversy that you might not want to dive into. Anyway, thank you for letting me comment.
Thank you for your comments, Joel. Anybody else with views related to items on today's agenda?
Hello, Adam Swanson, 108 Jenny Lane, 106 Jenny Lane. I just want to say thank you for giving our the streets that are up for this a chance to possibly get paved. I kind of wish all Petersburg was paved, or should be paved, in my opinion. But the question is who should pay for it? And what I believe the way I read the LID is you're giving the homeowners or the property owners the chance to put their money in to get their street paved. My problem, well, first of all, I'm for this, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to at least talk about this. I've talked to 40% of my street, and they're for it. Everybody just, there's a big question mark at how much it will be. And that's kind of the, well, two things. How much it will be, and how much do you have to pay at what rate and what time? Like, do I have to give you a check right now, or can you give, can we do payments over years, or, it's just a big question mark of all that. But I'm just here because I've heard a lot of opposition because, everybody has different circumstances, and it's a lot to ask somebody or a homeowner to pay when they're just got into a home, say. But I understand the circumstance that we have the machinery here and we're going to be doing paving, so hypothetically it would be cheaper to do it now than, say, when everybody was on board and to bring everything back into town. But I just say thank you for the opportunity for us to at least have this conversation. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Any other visitors in the audience with views related to items on today's agenda?
Excuse me, I'm Joe Nelson. I live on Unimac and Pearl F. Both streets are on the proposed paving issue. And I just had a couple of questions. I tend to agree with what we've already heard, but I have some questions about the voting. It seems like it's going to be a simple majority. I wonder if that's appropriate, you're obligating people for thousands of dollars, whether it should be something more like a supermajority or something more than just 51%. The other thing is I'm wondering if the paving rate has been negotiated with the owner. The fact that that machine is going to be here, it's a mutual benefit to have it in operation. I would think that the rate that we would get would be a very desirable rate, not the normal one. Thirdly, doesn't appear like there's any borough participation, and I question that, whether or not there should be some participation, even up to 50%. Borough pay half, landowners pay half. That's pretty much it. I do wonder about the vote, especially is it one vote per lot? Is that how that works for those who may own more than one lot on the street?
Carl, could you answer that real quick? I mean, it's per property? Per property. Yeah.
One of my lots is a corner lot, so I'm going to be paying on one side and also on the other side. So I get 2 votes.
You're going to vote for your vacant lot.
Right.
And your corner lot.
Right.
Left is paved. That's separately right now.
Votes on Unimac and 1 on. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Any other visitors in the audience with views related to today's agenda?
Of course there is. Carly Byer, I live at 1112 Lake Street. I didn't bring my horse today, Carl, to beat. I did it on Facebook yesterday. And Carl was very open, and he was able to answer many of the questions that not only I had, but other people as well. So that's great. I live on Lake Street. It's used as a cutoff for people who don't want to drive through town. I would say more than half the people who drive on Lake Street don't live there. A lot of the people in Severson have one-way streets, which is, people who live there are going to go up the one-way street. Nobody really is going to go looky-loo up a one-way street. They're not using it to get somewhere else. So not that I don't care about Severson subdivision, but I care about Lake Street because that's where I live. So it's being used a lot by other people who don't live there. There are some potholes, but they are regularly maintained by the borough, so that's great. We have some maintenance issues with sewer systems farther down the street that it's a process. So anyway, our street still has many things to happen before it would be a good idea to pave it. I personally don't want to pay for it. There are many streets in town that have been paved that property owners haven't had to pay for, and I'm of the mind that what's fair is fair. It's kind of naive in this day and age, but I don't want to be charged for something that people on Sandy Beach weren't charged for, people on Wrangell Avenue weren't charged for. If we're going to charge people, then we need to go ahead and reassess everybody for all the paved streets. That's what I feel. I'm willing to, I thought that was a great idea about, maybe the borough could kick in some, and then we could kick in some as property owners, but I don't want the burden to become mine for the convenience of all the people who drive through Lake Street using it as a cutoff. And some people have mentioned dust. I don't care about the dust. My mother-in-law cares about the dust, and she calls all the time, but that just means she's old and lazy and doesn't like to dust. So you can just not put any more of that stuff on the street, because I don't mind dusting. So people drive really fast on that street too, and the potholes, when there are potholes, which is rare, wink wink, Carl, slows people down a lot. We have a lot of children and retirees on that street, so some people get out of the way really fast and some people don't. So I recommend that you just drop it, because it really chaps my chaps. So
Thank you
thank
for your
you.
testimony.
Thanks.
Any other visitors in the audience with views related to today's agenda?
Afternoon, members of the Borough Assembly. My name is Julianne Curry. I think this is the first time I've ever testified in front of you guys for an issue that isn't fisheries related, so I'm really excited about this shiny new opportunity I've got here. I bought a house on Rambler Street up in Severson subdivision in 2007, so I've been living there for 10 years now. And as far as I can tell, I live on the only street in the entire borough where the neighborhood came together and brought a proposal to the city to be able to pave their own street. There's no other street in Severson's that I would be willing to live on because of that fact. I have to live on a paved street. The dust is not only a nuisance, but it's also a health concern, and I think that's definitely something that the residents of this city need to consider. So I'm fully supportive of the Borough Assembly coming forward and allowing neighborhoods the opportunity to be able to take control of their own destiny in their neighborhood and to be able to pave their streets. But there's a few things that I think that the Borough Assembly should consider today. One is you guys may want to consider raising the threshold for a yes vote to help minimize some of the hurt feelings and some bad blood within neighborhoods. I think 60% may be a good number for other issues, but on something that's as contentious as this, you may want to consider bumping that up a little bit. One of the other issues I think that you guys should consider is, once again, putting some skin in the game, whether it's a percentage match for money or coming up with an alternative for that. And I think that there's going to be plenty of time for public input to be able to figure out what that looks like. But I think it would be appropriate for the city to be able to figure out how to help the neighborhoods fund some of these endeavors. And then I would also like you guys to consider how you're going to space out the payment of neighborhoods that decide they do want to pave their street. One of the options that you could consider is attaching it to the property tax and spreading it out over a 10-year period. So thanks for bringing it forward. I look forward to more opportunities for public comment, and I support your endeavors.
Thank you. Any other visitors with views related to items on today's agenda? No one else, huh? Is there any visitors in the audience with views unrelated to items on today's agenda? Now's the time to step forward and state your peace of mind. What's that? Okay, it's been suggested we take a 5-minute break. So I might be late for my hair appointment, but that's okay. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break. Thanks, Mark. Yeah.
Well, I might not be around.
Good answer.
I'm not surprised.
I was right. Liz is leaving, but she's leaving on the 7th. But she said she's heard back from Randy, just very likely. So,
Oh, she has. Well,
yeah. So I thought at the end of the meeting, I asked her if she'd spend a couple minutes with us.
well, if I've got time, but if it's 2:30 and I have time to go get my hair cut.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah. That,
Okay, Kurt and Cindy, are you back on the line?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, we're going to start the meeting again. It's 1:14 p.m. on January 3rd, 2017. Next item up for the agenda, on the agenda is item 11, Board, Commission, and Committee reports. There are none. There's a couple items on the consent agenda. The first one is the Bottle Shop liquor license renewal application. The second one is Inga's Galley liquor license renewal application. So I would entertain a motion to approve all the items on the consent agenda in one motion.
So move.
Is there a second?
second.
Been moved by Member Strand, seconded by Member Lynn to approve the renewal applications for those two liquor licenses. Any discussions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, the items on the consent agenda are accepted. A report of other officers. We have report from our auditors today. Sam Thompson will be the one presenting the review, not Joy Merrier. So, Sam, are you on the line?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, I'd like to say thank you to everyone on the assembly for the opportunity to speak today and
and for the opportunity to serve the borough. Our firm as BDO and then before as McCundy Cottrell has done the audit for many years now, and we greatly value the long-term relationship we have with the borough. I'd also like to say thank you to Jody Tao and the entire finance department for all their help. They were well prepared, very friendly, easy to work with, responsive to all our questions, and they helped the audit get done in a quick fashion, and they make it easy and enjoyable to work with. So I'm not sure. I know everyone has a copy of the financial statements. Does everyone else have a copy of the audit wrap-up document?
Yes, I believe so.
Everyone has one? Okay. So I'd like to start with this document. Now, this document's a required piece of communication, and our standards require that we share with you as the assembly, the body in charge of governing Petersburg. So I'd like to start on page 3 of the wrap-up document. The status of our audit. So our audit is complete at this point. We finished our audit on December 22nd, 2016. We issued an unmodified opinion. Now, an unmodified opinion is the highest or the best level of assurance that we can professionally issue. So you can think of this as an A. It's a clean opinion. And what this means is that we believe the financial statements prepared by management are materially correct. That is, there's no material misstatements.
Okay.
Going to page 4 of the audit wrap-up document, this kind of just summarizes some of the different accounting practices, policies, and estimates of the borough. So just real quickly, the borough adopted 3 new accounting standards in 2016. Now, none of these standards had a major impact on the basic financial statements as they look. The only real change that is noticeable at all is a new footnote disclosure regarding the investments. And we believe that the borough implemented the adoption of these 3 standards correctly and effectively. And we did not know any changes in how the borough calculates its significant accounting estimates. These are such things as whether or not you're going to collect on your accounts receivable, the landfill closure liability calculation, and also the net pension liability. Now, I know the net pension liability number is a number that was new as of 2015, so this is the second year being there. Now, you'll notice later on the number went up by quite a bit. Now, this had to do with a change in methodology by the PERS plan itself, not with how the borough recorded the number. The borough still records the number based off the numbers provided by the state of Alaska, which is still correct. So going to page 5, we have to communicate there were 8 adjusting journal entries that were made by us, the auditors, to the trial balance that was provided to us by management for the start of our audit. Now, none of these entries really are of much concern. None of them were material in any kind of sense. The largest entry that we recorded was to record the 2016 pension adjustments. I'd like to point out that this adjustment couldn't have been made by management because the numbers weren't made available by the state of Alaska until October 21st. So because of that, that was one entry that was then affected several funds that could not have been posted until well after we had started the audit. We are not aware of any uncorrected misstatements, and I would like to point out that the borough does have 2 component units, the Petersburg Medical Center and Petersburg School District. Now, both the Medical Center and the School District were audited by our firm, BDO, but they were audited by different engagement teams. Both these component units received unmodified opinions similar to the borough, and their financial statements are materially correct, and there are no exceptions there. And we are not aware of any unrecorded or uncorrected misstatements related to the medical center or the school district. On page 6 of the audit document, there's some more required communications here. We did not know any significant or unusual transactions that lacked accounting guidance. We concur with the borough's use of all estimates, and we believe the borough correctly adopted and implemented all of the required accounting pronouncements for the year. Now, page 7, internal controls over financial reporting. I would like to point out now, we do not issue an opinion over internal controls. However, as a part of our audit of the financial statements, which we do issue an opinion over, that we review the borough's internal controls and we test certain internal controls in their relationship to the numbers that are recorded in the financial statements. We didn't note any problems. We note no material weaknesses, so that speaks to the success that Jody and everyone in the finance department has had over the past year as far as following the different policies and procedures related to recording amounts correctly prior to our arrival. Page 8 is we encountered no disagreements with management. There's no significant difficulties encountered during the audit, and we were not forced to deviate from our original plan. The books and records were in order. They were provided to us upon our request. All our questions were answered. Again, nothing to report here. So going to page 9 of the audit wrap-up document, I would like to point out now, for the year ended January 30th, 2018, so two audits from now, or another fiscal year after the end of this one, the borough is going to have to adopt GASB Accounting Statement 75. Now, this is of note in that the borough will not have to record its proportion of the PERS other post-employment benefit, also referred to as OPEB, liability. So if you go back to last year, 2015, the borough was required under GASB Accounting Statement 68 to adopt a recognition of the PERS pension liability, we refer to as the net pension liability. So this is very similar to that, except this amount is picking up the liability related to PERS as it relates to mostly health care and other disability benefits. The GASB 68 last year, we just recorded the pension side of PERS, so this is the other side of those benefits that are due to plan participants at a later date. So I would like to throw that out there because, again, it's going to add a very material liability to the borough's books. But this won't occur until fiscal year in January 30th, 2018. So in about 2 years from now, we'll be able to talk about what that number will be. But it's going to be significant, so I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that number ahead of time. Now I'd like to turn our attention to the actual financial statements, if everyone is on board with that. I would like to start on page 1 of the financial statement. Now, it won't be the very first page in the document, but it's going to be the first page labeled number 1, and you're going to see a BDO letterhead at the top of this page. I'd like to point out that these first 3 pages refer to as the Independent Auditor's Report. Now, this is the only document in the basic financial statements and is the responsibility of BDO. Every other document is the responsibility of the borough, of which we audited and issued our opinion over. On page 2, you'll see that we issued an unmodified opinion. As I mentioned earlier, this is the highest level of assurance which we can render. And on page 3, you'll see that we issued our opinion on December 22nd, 2016. Now, as you can see, there's about 150 pages in the financial statements, and I don't want to talk about all of them. We would be here all night. So I'm just going to point out a few of the highlights, some of the numbers I think are important for you as the assembly to know. And if you have any questions over any other figures in here, you can bring them up, and I'll be happy to discuss them either now or at a later date. So I would like to go to page 20. Now, page 20 is Exhibit A1. This is known as the Statement of Net Position. For maybe individuals that have a background in for-profit accounting, not governmental accounting, this is also referred to as a balance sheet. It's simply a list of the borough's assets, liabilities, and equity as of June 30th, 2016. So at this date, the borough had just over $159 million in total assets. Now, approximately $122 million of this consisted of land, construction in progress, and other capital assets. So this is your property, plant, and equipment, physical items less any depreciation. Of that, there's also another approximately $33 million of cash and investments, and this makes up the majority of the borough's assets. The other assets consist of about $360,000 of inventory, about $126,000 in prepaid, and about $3.5 million of receivables net any allowances for doubtful accounts. The borough had $29.1 million in liabilities. Approximately $26 million of this amount is in outstanding bonds or loans payable, as well as the net pension liability. So the net pension liability at year-end was $8,362,000. So one thing about the net pension liability that stands out from your other liabilities is now the net pension liability is not due and payable at any particular date. Now your bonds, your loans, your accounts payable, those are amounts that all have a finite date of when they need to be paid. No, for example, your debt service payments for your bonds and your loans for next year and the year after that and so forth. Now, the net pension liability, the borough is not going to have to make any actual payment on this amount outside of what you've been contributing for the past several years. That is your 22% of covered payroll that you pay to PERS with every payroll. So that amount hasn't changed. You'll still contribute your 22% of your covered payroll amount into the future. Now, the state does have the option to raising this rate above that 22%, and that therefore would increase the amount that the borough has to pay out to the state related to PERS. Or they could do something else and ask that a portion of that net pension liability be paid down at a particular date. But as of now, nothing of that has occurred. As you can guess, that would be very unpopular statewide. I don't want to speak for the state and their plans, but just wanted to throw that out there, that net pension liability amount, that $8.36 million, doesn't reflect anything that is actually going to result in a cash outlay anytime soon. The borough has just over almost $132 million in equity or total net position. Of this amount, $22,094,000 was considered unrestricted and available for use. That's the balance sheet for the borough as a whole. Going to page 22, the next page is a statement of activities. Now this might look a little weird to some folks with a for-profit background, but this is an income statement. And you'll see for the year, down towards the bottom right, the change in net position for the borough was just over $1 million at positive $1,070,017. We'll talk a little bit about some of the revenue amounts in particular and how they correspond to last year. So the property tax revenues for 2016 were at $3,168,000. This is slightly better than 15, where the amount was at $3,162,000, so a slight improvement there. Sales taxes decreased this year. In fiscal year 16, total sales tax revenues were at $2,945,000. FY15, it was just a little bit higher at $3.1 million. The big changes for the year were related to your capital and operating grants. So capital grant revenues for FY16 were at $3,126,000. Now in FY15, because the commercial dock vehicle drive-down project was in full go, they were higher at closer to $7.2 million. So if you're going to compare the 2 years, you would notice that that's around a $4 million decrease. Well, it had to do with a very large capital project where more activity was done in FY15 versus FY16. Now, operating grants were lower in FY16 versus FY15 at about $1.83 million versus closer to $2.4 million in the prior year. This mostly had to do with a significant decrease in the amount of federal forestry receipts that were received in FY16. In FY16, the amount of federal forestry dollars that came in were around $600,000 less than what they were in FY15. Just some numbers I wanted to point out there, if anyone were to compare the 2 years as to why the amounts have changed so drastically. So that's the entity-wide statements. Now I know as the Assembly, there's a great focus on the amounts of certain individual funds. So starting on page 22, we have fund financial statements. So page 22 is the balance sheet for the general fund and the other major fund this year, the new administration building renovation fund, as well as all the non-major funds combined together. So the general fund, as of June 30th, had unassigned fund balance of $3,786,000. Now this unassigned fund balance, this is fund balance that the Assembly has it at its disposal to spend as it best deems. So there's no external or otherwise prior Assembly commitments made to how this money could have been spent. Going to page 24, you'll have the income statement for the general fund and the other major fund, as well as the non-major aggregate. You'll see the general fund revenues exceeded expenditures by just over $1.34 million. But you'll note that the general fund actually had a net change in fund balance of a decrease of $605,000. Now this had to do with about just over $2.5 million of transfers out by the general fund in FY16. About $1.3 million of the transfers out of the general fund went to the police, jail, and administration building capital project. Another $570,000 went to the harbor and port fund for capital costs, and another $416,000 was transferred out for debt service costs. Now, page 39 of the financials, if you wanted to see a detail of the actual, all the transfers between all the different funds, that's where you would find that. I'd like to point out that the borough had a new major fund in FY16. This was the Police Jail Administrative Building Renovation Capital Project Fund. So this was a fund that was created by finance to help track the costs and sources of funding related to the new building construction that was going on and is continuing to go on. So you'll see on page 24 there was $1,854,000 in capital expenditures related to this project in that fund in FY16, and you'll see a lot in FY17 as well as construction continues to go on. As of June 30th, the borough had $2.7 million in committed fund balance in this fund for that project. Going to page 28, now we have the different enterprise funds. This is the income statement for the different enterprise funds of the borough. Now, I'd like to point out that all the funds for the borough reported an operating loss for the year, but there's kind of a silver lining in this. Now, while all the funds had an operating loss, if you look up a couple lines to the depreciation amount, now if you add back this depreciation, which depreciation expense is a non-cash item, so it doesn't represent an actual cash outlay by the borough, it's just an accounting estimate that is made every year. Most of these funds tended to trend better overall when depreciation is added back in. In fact, all the funds would have been positive from operations except for the assisted living fund if you factor out depreciation expense. Overall, the enterprise funds combined recorded a net change, a net position that was a decrease of $194,000, so almost break even overall. So the water fund, the harbor port, and assisted living funds all had fiscal years, and all had a fiscal year in 16 that was a little worse than FY15. And this had to do with the amounts of depreciation expense and other operating costs, and it greatly exceeded the amount of operating revenues these funds recorded in fiscal year 16. Because of that, all these three funds, the water fund, the harbor fund, and the assisted living fund, required transfers in from other funds, such as the general fund, to help cover capital costs. Going to page 30, we have the cash flow statement for the enterprise funds. I find this statement to be very useful because it allows you to actually see the effect of all the cash coming in and coming out for each fund. So overall, for the enterprise funds, cash flow was positive for the year by $1.25 million. Harbor had the strongest overall increase for the year, positive $852,000, but this mostly had to do with the transfer into the harbor fund of about $570,000 there. You'll see the electric fund also had a strong change for the year of $846,000, almost $847,000 in the positive. And this had to do with receipts from customers and other users greatly exceeding amounts paid for other operating activities. Now, the wastewater fund had a negative change for the year. Their cash decreased by about $521,000, and this had to do with amounts that were outlaid for the purchase of property, plant, and equipment. So you'll see that the wastewater fund expended $938,000 of cash out the door to purchase property, plant, and equipment. If you back that out, overall, the fund had an operating improvement on cash for the year of closer to $300,000. With that, I'd like to go to page 55 of the note. Now, we're skimming over some of the other notes. They're all very useful in their own right, but I'd like to focus in on the net pension liability because I know this is an amount that for a lot of people is a very important subject. So in FY16, the net pension liability related to PERS was $8,362,857. Now, the borough recorded an amount of just over $5,473,000 in fiscal year 15. So the math on that was an increase in 16 of $2.89 million, which is a very substantial increase, as you can imagine. So there's a couple different things going on here why that amount went up. So first off, the liability for the PERS plan as a whole, so statewide, both the state and all the other participating schools, hospitals, cities, and boroughs increased by $185 million. Now the amount attributable to Petersburg statewide went up by just over $200,000. So while that doesn't really make a lot of sense, because I just said overall the liability went up by $2.89 million for Petersburg. Well, the state also changed the methodology in which Petersburg's allocation is split between Petersburg itself and also the state. So in the prior year, the borough had an overall, as of 2015, the borough had a net PERS liability of $10.4 million. Now, the borough, under the old state methodology, was only required to book $5.47 million of this. The other $4.93 million was the state was on the hook for. Now, due to some changes in state methodology, this ratio between what the state was taking responsibility for and what the borough was taking responsibility for changed, and it changed in the benefit of the state, not the borough. So as of June 30th, 2016, the total PERS liability for the borough went up slightly to $10.6 million, but the amount that needs to be booked on the borough's books increased to $8.36 million, while the state's only picking up $2.24 million. So I wanted to throw that out there, that this was a major change due to a change in methodology that went into effect for June 30th, 2016. Now, the good news is the methodology is now set in stone going into the future, so there shouldn't be any of these significant swings one way or the other. At this point in time, the only major changes that will occur will be due to the liability for the plan as a whole, not for allocation between the state and the borough. So some other PERS items to note, that there was a delay in getting the report last year. Like I mentioned earlier, it wasn't released until October 21st. Now, the state PERS office has said this report should be available sometime in April this year, April 2017. This will help. It will allow the borough to know its liability related to PERS at the end of the fiscal year, not 4 months after the fact. So we'll see if the state can come through with that time frame and meet those goals. The last portion of the financial statements I'd like to address is towards the back. It starts on page 135. Now, this is the single audit section of the audit in your state and federal schedules. Because of the amounts of funding that the borough receives from both the federal government and the state of Alaska, we were required to do special audits over these amounts. So we audited your federal funds, and we did a focus on the amount of money that was received for the forestry or steep programs. And we also audited various state programs that had over $75,000 in expenditures for the year. So our conclusion on both the federal and state single audit was similar to the financial statements. We issued unmodified opinions. We believe the amounts are materially correct, and we noted no unallowed or disallowed costs for the year. And we believe the internal controls related to the single audit are in compliance, and we note no material weaknesses there as well. So that concludes what I had prepared. Now, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to field those at this time.
Any questions of Sam on his presentation? I don't hear anybody on the phone or anybody raising their hand here in the room, Sam.
All right. Well, thank you for your time. As always, can be reached at any time. If anyone ever has a question later on during the year, either for these financial statements or anything else, please feel free to contact me, and I'll be happy to get in touch with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is 14, the mayor's report. There's not much to report this time. We're seeking letters of interest for the Petersburg residents willing to serve on the following boards, commissions until October 2017 municipal election. Their hospital board still has 2 vacant seats. Letters of interest may be addressed to the borough clerk and emailed to dthompson@petersburgak.gov or mailed to Box 329 in Petersburg or delivered to the temporary office at 15 North 12th Street. Still looking for someone on the assembly to be a representative to the Historic Preservation Commission, if anybody's interested. In addition, the commission still has a vacancy on the Planning Commission representative seat. Letters of interest may be submitted to the borough clerk as outlined earlier in this report. And that's it. That brings us to the manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a reminder, the borough will be holding the public land auction at 6 p.m. on January 17th, 2017, so that's the next assembly meeting. It'll be here at our temporary meeting location at 15 North 12th Street, Petersburg, Alaska. For more information on the available land parcels, you can go out to the borough website at www.petersburgak.gov. Swim lessons will be starting up again on January 19th at the Aquatic Center. Those wanting to get trained. Again, welcome to our 2 new officers, and today is their first duty day. They begin orientation on January 4th, followed by a 14-week field training and evaluation program. We also have Dispatcher Corrections Officer Barb Beasley will be attending the Municipal Corrections Officer Training. This training is required for certification and will take place from January 23rd until February 10th in Palmer. Funding is paid by the Alaska Police Standards Council. And also, Christine Rumpel started initial training as a Dispatcher Corrections Officer on the 27th of December, and really happy to have her on board. We still have one open Dispatcher Corrections Officer position to fill. We've gotten a request from the Department of Corrections asking us to assist with electronic monitoring of inmates not housed in the jail. Kelly has made a request for more specific information and costs, and we're hoping to have what they have in mind to us as soon as possible so we can figure out if it's something we can do. Fire hydrant snow removal is usually kind of last on the list for Public Works, although with this weather, it's nice not to have to worry about it, but it's kind of a public service announcement asking folks if they have the ability to clean the hydrants around in front of their house. It actually helps the fire department and Public Works and keeps everybody a lot safe. At a minimum, asking people just not to pile snow around or in front of the fire hydrants, so in case they need to be accessed, fire department can get to them. We are encouraging, especially with this upcoming couple weeks here, really cold weather, asking people to make sure they're protecting their water lines and water meters with adequate insulation whenever possible. Heat tapes should be considered as well. House skirting that is loose or missing and subjecting crawl spaces to the cold should be repaired. You don't want to have a broken water pipe under your house at this time of year. RS Braun surveyors, Rick was able to, and his group was able to get out despite the cold temperatures, to complete the spillway surface survey for P&D engineers on the City Creek Dam. The survey will be used to develop the rehabilitation design that get the work done out there. Water staff with Public Works support was successful in replacing a 6-inch water meter and pipe fittings that served the Icicle Cannery. Fittings had corroded to the point of possible failure, but now are ready to provide uninterrupted service to the facility for many years to come, thanks to both those groups who got out there in Icicle for working with us to get it done. Sanitation Department would like to thank the community for their patience and patronage in 2016. The recycling changes, as well as the recent holiday schedule, were smooth for the department, thanks to our customers' participation and attention. A lot of changes, and it went, in the long run, very well. We've got a surplus equipment sealed bid auction underway. Sealed bids for various vehicles and equipment are due to the Public Works Office by 1 p.m. on January 13th, 2017. The list of equipment is posted on the borough's website and Facebook, and lists are also posted at various borough facilities. And Public Works has been helping the Manor with the distribution of plans and the bid opening for the portico repair project. Plans are available for the download on the borough website or in hard copy for a fee at Public Works. The bid opening is scheduled for January 18th, 2017. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Is there any questions of Steve on his report?
Just one more. Back to the monitoring program. Is our future, is the future of our funding, our jail funding, going to be tied to that also, do you think, Steve?
We're not sure. That's one of the questions that Kelly had, was does it have any impact on our current or future jail funding? And they have not answered, unless I'm mistaken, they have not answered that question yet.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Steve. Unfinished business is the next item on today's agenda, and first item is ordinance for second reading, and that's an ordinance authorizing the sale of Lot A, Block 302, Greenbelt Subdivision, Airport Edition, parcel 01006-442, Plat 77-2 in the Petersburg Recording District. I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its second reading.
So move.
Second? Second. Okay, motion been made by Member Strand, seconded by Member Lagadakis. Any discussion on this ordinance in its second reading? Clerk, call the roll.
Mark?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Okay, ordinance 2016-14 passes unanimously with a 6-0 vote in its second reading. Next item on the agenda is item 17, and it's new business. First item is 17-01, resolution 2017-01. First resolution of the new year, resolution authorizing initiation of a local improvement district program for paving of borough streets. I'd entertain a motion to adopt resolution 2017-01.
So moved.
Second. Motion been made by Member Greger, seconded by Member Lynn to adopt resolution 2017-01. Is there any discussion on this resolution?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions on this. I'm still hung up on a couple things. One is, what length of time on payback are we talking about? I know that hasn't been set. And my next question then would be is, when we look at it from the standpoint of a property owner, and listening to some of the people here, are we talking that we would leave their property taxes alone and then have a payout for like 10 years? I don't know. I'm asking some questions here. And then Joel, I think, asked a very good question, is all the information from a particular street would come to you, and you guys would determine whether there's 60%. What's the involvement of the street itself in forming their own LID without, prior to the time they come to you, et cetera? What's your thinking process on it?
Mr. Mayor and Assembly, Carl Hagerman, Public Works Director. To answer your questions, Bob, the term and conditions of the payback on the LID have not been fleshed out yet. The process is so lengthy that there are certain bits of information that go out at certain times, and it's hard to formulate the terms when we don't even know what residents will be dealing with. I think it would obviously be helpful to talk with the residents. If a petition is passed, there's a public hearing, and that's really a meeting of the minds between the residents and the borough to discuss the plan, the construction plan, how the assessments work, to really lay out more information. And at that time, terms and conditions could be discussed, just to make sure that they're not thinking 30 years and the Assembly's thinking 2 years. To make sure that there's commonality in the terms that could possibly be approved by the Assembly. Again, those terms would have to be included in an LID ordinance that would go through 3 readings and a public hearing in front of this body before they would become law. So there's a tremendous amount of planning, and one of the problems that I've had with this process is that it's so long and there's so many steps to it that there's a couple different situations of chicken and the egg. From the property owner's perspective, they want to know how much it's going to cost them. And so we can't really tell them that until we know which streets are actually going to be involved in the LID process, to really take a closer look, fine-tune those numbers, get with the contractor, make sure they make sense to that, to CCON. But why go through all that effort if we don't even know that there's going to be a petition passed? So that's one situation where chicken and the egg. For the Assembly's viewpoint, you want to know how many residents are going to be involved or interested in this, because that translates to a bottom line that the borough will upfront the money to get this paved and then accept reimbursement. And we don't know the answer to that yet either. There's so many steps to this, like I said, that it takes a lot of patience to make it through this. And at this point today, the resolution that's in front of the Assembly, the only thing that it does is allows the Public Works Department to send letters and copies of petitions to prospective neighborhoods. And then actually the onus of the process to move forward shifts to the property owners. And in answer to your second question, that is when the residents of these streets would talk. Somebody, if somebody wants to champion that, the petition in the neighborhood, they would visit each house and collect signatures or not. It really shifts to a process at that point that is driven by the residents. And if there's no desire to collect signatures, if there's no desire to get together, then they don't turn in a petition and that street isn't considered. So it's a pretty complex process, and there's lots of steps, like I said. It doesn't come up very often, and that's probably why, because it's very complex.
The property owners have talked to me are really concerned about the amount of time, the payback. In other words, let's say that a particular property owner is, it's $4,000. Well, paying it back over 1 year is different than paying back over 10 years. And then what kind of interest do we charge? And that's the questions that are coming back to me from the people who have talked to me. And I said, I don't know the answer to these, but I do think from an assembly standpoint, we need to weigh in. Are we willing to talk about 10 years, 5 years, so that you have something to go on, at least from my perspective?
I would agree with that. I think, generally how this would occur, I would see it happening is that staff would come up with a recommendation for the assembly to consider. Like I said, I think that would be born from a public hearing process, talking with the residents to see what they feel is reasonable. It's somewhat of a negotiation, on how the terms come to be finalized, and the more information, the better. At this point, we're really at the very start of the process. So there's going to be a lot more, if the process moves forward, there's going to be a lot more information sharing obviously needed, and some meaningful discussion to determine what is reasonable for both entities.
And the other question they've been asking me is, at what point, if I sign on, and then I end up don't liking your terms because you won't tell me up front, and this is what's coming to me, can I back out?
If they sign the petition in favor of it, and the petition receives 60% of the street's residents, so it will move forward, excuse me, there will be a public hearing, they'll get more information. In that public hearing and the information they receive, if they decide not to, they don't like the idea anymore, the next step after the hearing is the balloting process. And in that, they should vote no. If they want to back out, that's the time to make their intention known. If the street still has 60% support through the balloting process, then the project still moves forward. And the LID ordinance is then considered by the assembly. And the assembly can hear public testimony and decide to not pass an ordinance in one of the readings. That would also kill the project. So it's, like I said, it's pretty complex. But there are at least 6 different actions by either the residents or the assembly where the project fails.
Any other questions? Jay?
Hey, Carl. Heard a couple of residents talking about 60% being a concerningly low number for something that could be divisive. Out of curiosity, where did that number arrive from?
The 60% is in the municipal code. It's in Chapter 4.12 of the code. It lays out how these LIDs are formed and how they move forward. Interestingly enough, the charter, which also talks about local improvement, calls for a 50% vote. So I'm going by the code because the charter does refer to the code as outlining the rules for this process. But it's interesting that the charter has an even lower threshold for a majority to move forward with this.
Roger. So the reason I was asking, if I'm hearing you right, then maybe this is a question for Steve, is as an assembly, we'd need to change code if we wanted to change the percentage of vote? Like we don't have that leeway as an assembly?
You would be limited on you need to go through the ordinance process of changing that. And as Carl mentioned, the charter is actually got a lower threshold. That's a bigger.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, we're stuck on that one, to put it simply, more or less, unless we want to go through a more of a lengthy
You could change the
process.
ordinance. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Kurt, Cindy, do you have any questions for Carl?
I have one for Carl. This is Kurt. Carl, so if we're going to allow these homeowners to pay over time, who's going to put up the initial costs?
The borough would have to do that. That would be. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and are we in a position to pony up that 700 to? I'm assuming between $700,000 to $1 million.
Well, we don't know how much yet, and that's part of the problem here. Another chicken and egg situation. We don't know how many neighborhoods would actually take advantage of this and return petitions in excess of 60% support. It's after the petition process that we know, or at least have an idea of what the number possibly could be. Right now, if we assume that every neighborhood is going to return a successful petition, then yeah, I don't have that. I think it's total number could be upwards of. Oh, I don't have the total on here. I think it's about 700,000 for paving. So, are we in a position to do that? Probably not, and that is a decision that then shifts to the assembly to decide what's acceptable and what is not.
Does that answer your question, Kurt?
Yes, it does. Thanks, Mark.
Cindy, do you have any questions of Carl or comments?
My only comment, I have to give Carl credit for trying to jump on this opportunity. I do have to say that the folks that I've spoken to surprised me by universally saying they were opposed to the idea, because I do see it as an opportunity. But I also have the same question with Jay. I didn't know whether or not we had the flexibility to be more stringent on the percentage of votes than the code allowed, but it sounds like that's not. And I very much take to heart the fairness issue. I am one of those people that have used Lake Street as a pass-through, and I do not live there. And I'm concerned that we're burdening some residents where we did not others, and that isn't necessarily fair. At this point, I'm leaning towards not voting for it. That 60% really causes me discomfort. I would like to see that more people were on board if a street decided to sign on to this.
Thank you, Cindy. Nancy?
I'm torn about this, but I like the idea of offering it, making the offer for people to decide. And if we have more than one opportunity to turn it down, even if people gathered signatures and we could override their positive choice, I feel better about that, having an opportunity later to get more feedback. But I like the idea of offering it, the choice to them.
Well said. Steve, you had a comment?
Yeah, yes, sir. It's more just an observation for the assembly and the general public. Majority of our paving money has come from a program called Secure Rural Schools that is, for all intents and purposes, to our knowledge, is probably gone. What Carl and we're trying to do is kind of one of this last-ditch efforts to have some paving done here in town while that plant's here, knowing that in the future there's going to be very little paving money available to do any paving in town for extensive period of time. So for those people asking the question, why this, why now, it's some of it has to do with the plant is here and it will go away in the spring unless they have work here to do. But it also has to do with this may be the last cheapest opportunity for people to get streets paved. We're not going to be doing a lot of paving going forward unless we go back to trying to issue bonds across the whole community, or there's a new source of funds that's outlined by the assembly. So that's why it happens so quick, is because here we are. So I don't think I'm.
Is that you, Cindy?
Yes. Would it be possible to table this and reconsider the percentage vote that would move this forward? Because I think that is a sticking point for a lot of folks.
I think, wasn't that question answered, that you have to, by code, use 60%?
That we address a change in the code before we move this resolution forward.
And that would take 3 readings, if I'm not correct, so then you're pushing this back a month and a half. And it looks like we're already on a pretty stringent time schedule. I mean, does that answer your question, or Carl, do you have a better clarification of that?
Mr. Mayor, I think you hit on the point that I was going to make, is it does add a month and a half to the timeline, and at this point, I don't know when CCON will move that plan out. I know it's going to leave this summer sometime. The quicker we get an answer to them on whether there's going to be additional work in Petersburg, probably the better. If it's a situation where the Assembly wants to address the LID percentage, you should probably start that process. I would say that we should start that process, but should we stop this process
Mr. Mayor,
from going forward?
Sorry, Carl, if I just put it in there, but you know, I do have the same concerns that some of these other members have, but I have to agree with Nancy that right now we're just on a fact-finding mission right now. This does not obligate us in one way or the other of actually going through with this if the neighbors have a different opinion. So I think I'm going to go ahead and vote for this just so that we can keep the ball moving forward. And we'll just look at the chips as they lay, as they show up, and we might be surprised that what the outcome will be here. So anyway, that's my last 2 cents worth.
Okay, Bob, you had another comment?
Yeah, I want to go back to Cindy's question. Is there any reason that we could not start a change in an ordinance now, let Carl proceed? And I'm on the same track as both Jay and Cindy are, is that I think the percentage needs to be higher. And the other point I'd like to make is that I'm going back, are we looking at 5 years, 10 years? I think the Assembly needs to weigh in on what they're willing to go with on the amount of time for the payback from the property owners.
Any other comments in the room? Steve, you have a comment?
Debbie and I were checking schedules, and we could move, if the Assembly chose to move forward with the 60% on the petition, which and on the resolution that you have, start the ordinance process to change where the vote would come into play. I think you'd have 3 readings, so basically third reading would be the second meeting in February, that you could at that point, that amount that vote would be changed. And does that work with the schedule? So in other words, the petition you don't have enough time to change, but the vote percentage you could.
Okay, any other discussion? I've kind of torn with this resolution too. I like the idea of paving streets. I understand where people are coming from when they're saying that they're going to have to pay a percentage to get their street paved when other people in town have already had theirs paid and the borough paid for most of it or all of it. Some of them are state roads. Wrangell Avenue, I believe, was paved when it was a state road and turned over to the borough, so that doesn't really apply. But there's so many variables. I'm having a hard time being, voting on the yes on this. But I guess if we could move forward without any other obligation other than borough staff time, which has a monetary value to it, I don't know. I'll think about it over the next 10 seconds here, I guess. Nancy?
By the same token, if we approve this, and it turns out that overall 60% approve and 40 don't, and we think that's too close, we can stop doing it at that point.
Right. True.
So.
Just a point of clarification. If I'm hearing you right, Nancy, they go through the process at the 60%. Some of us have taken issue with thinking that's too low, and let's say the final votes come in at that, we can still override it at that point if we want?
Yeah, if only 60%, say 60% overall, or more neighborhoods have 60% against than have it for, we could still.
We can take into account if some come in 70-30, 80-20, et cetera.
Or come in 44 and 60 against, or.
Point taken, but gotcha.
Also, I have a question for Carl. what if a street that's not on your list gets together and decides they want to? Can they be added to the list?
They sure can. The streets that I chose were really the streets that made the most sense to me. They're more recognized as isolated neighborhoods. That the property owners that live on these streets, paying for the paving, will get the most benefit from them. The testimony today about Lake Street being a shortcut through town is well taken. It's kind of a borderline. There are people that drive through Lake Street to get from point A to point B. But I do think that the residents use and would benefit the most from paving on that street. The LID process is open to any resident at any time. So if other streets in the borough believe they want to take part in this, they need to contact me. I suppose I can steer them in the right direction, the right code to look at. But they provide a petition to the manager, and we take it from there.
I could think of another scenario. One of the people that testified today about Lake Street said that the utilities are not up to snuff under that road. I don't know if is that correct?
There are utility improvements that can be done up there. The one thing to consider with all these roads where utilities may be an issue is that they're outside of the road prism. So those improvements can be made without disturbing the asphalt.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if the borough, there was a comment made, maybe it was in the last meeting, where the borough would get the roads up to paving standards. Does that include utility work too, or is that going to be if Lake Street voted to do this LID formation and get on board and they got their 60% votes and they move forward, what if there was improvements that needed to be done under the road surface that would incur a cost before you paved it? Whose responsibility would that be?
The utilities.
So then that could fall back on the borough.
Wastewater, yes.
So that could be another hidden cost. I mean, if that neighborhood, voted to move forward, I just, don't want to, have people pointing fingers. Well, they got their road paved, and the cost. I don't know. I'm just having a hard time grasping this. But as far as moving forward to the next step, I don't see where it's an issue. One other thing we need to talk about as far as meetings and if we do an ordinance, the second meeting in February is scheduled to be on the 20th, and that's the week of AML. So I don't know if we'd have.
Might have to reschedule.
We might have to reschedule that, so that could either move it up a week or back another week. So it's just another thing to think about. So, any other discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Nancy?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Okay, resolution 2017-01 passes unanimously with a 6-0 vote, and it sounded like there was some hesitation there in some of the votes, but we'll see where the next step goes from here. Next item is 17-007. It's a letter to Alaska's 30th legislature urging passage of a long-term, fair, balanced, and sustainable budget. There's a draft letter provided in the packet today. Is the wording in that acceptable to everybody? One thing I think we should do, though, is send it to the entire legislature, not just our representatives and the governor and lieutenant governor. That was asked of us by one of the governor's staff last year when we sent in our letter. So.
It is addressed to the Honorable 30th Alaska Legislature.
Okay, let's see. It's CC to the specific 4 on the bottom. All right. So, any discussion on this letter? Clerk, call the roll.
Kurt?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda is vessels extension on a lease to Alaska Yacht and Vessel Services lease extension request. This is for some land at Scow Bay Turnaround. Entertain a motion to approve this lease extension.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Member Lagadakis, seconded by Member Gregor to approve this lease extension. Is there any discussion? Yeah, it's been approved by the Planning Commission and the Harbor Board have recommended this, so if there's no other discussion, will the clerk call the roll?
Kurt?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes. Okay, there's been an extension voted for the lease for Alaska Yacht and Vessels. Next item on the agenda, 17-014, lease amendment request from Gerald J. Whitethorn, doing business as Alaska Commercial Electronics. I'd entertain a motion to approve this lease amendment.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Strand, seconded by Member Lynn to approve this lease amendment. Any discussion? Just for the listening public, it's just Mr. Whitethorn, the owner of this business, is requesting 2 amendments to his lease: to remove a previous business owner who is no longer a partner, and to change the wording so it doesn't have to be a marine electrical business that owns the lease. So there's no other discussion. Will the clerk call the roll?
Nancy?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Jay?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
Okay, that passes unanimously, so that lease amendment will be moved forward. Anybody have any communications today? Okay, seeing none. Assembly discussion items. Nothing specific other than recognitions. Is there anything under, nothing listed? Does anybody have any recognitions? So that brings us to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Hey, where you at, Cindy?
Where you at, Cindy?
Hey, please ask them not to hang up.
Oh, yeah.
Guys,
Oh, I'm back in North
We have
Carolina. You're
another
down in
meeting.
Bloomington.
Please ask them not to hang up.
Forgot about that.
Oh, wait a minute, Cindy, Kurt.
Cindy and Kurt, don't hang up, we have another meeting.
Sorry about that. We have a special meeting. It should be quick.
Hi. Yeah, we're there. We're going to stay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, here we go.
Nancy, we got one more.